Husband accused me of murdering his sister publicly after months of secret suspicion, and now I'm living a legal nightmare. My name is Emily, I'm 30, and I married Luke, who's 33, just a year ago, though we've known each other for over 20 years. We were always close with his family, especially his younger sister, Laura, who was 29. We'd all see each other every couple weeks, having dinners, spending weekends together, just living normal, quietly happy lives. Almost 6 months ago, everything changed. Laura died in a freak accident. She tumbled down the stairs at her parents' house and hit her head on a windowsill at the half landing. It was shocking and senseless. I found myself haunted that I was the last person to see her alive. I just stopped by their house for less than 10 minutes, she'd been making coffee in her pajamas and didn't even offer me a drink, and I didn't stay. How could that random, trivial moment have been her last? She deserves so much more. When Luke's parents found her, they called my husband. We rushed over together and faced the aftermath as a family. What I could never have prepared for was what happened next. In the days after her death, Luke began grilling me about every detail, exactly what we talked about, how she looked, where we stood, what she wore, impossible details, down to the pattern on her pajamas. If I got something wrong or couldn't answer, he would accuse me of withholding information or contradicting myself, even when it was a slip or a minor point he'd purposely twist. For almost a week, this turned into a tense, hostile interrogation. Finally, I snapped and told him I wouldn't answer another question. He dropped it, and I chose to see it as a weird, sad quirk of grief. After that, Luke's behavior returned to normal, at least as normal as someone grieving such a loss could be. But then, last Friday, chaos erupted. All of us were at his parents' house when, out of nowhere, Luke accused me, directly, loudly, and in front of his parents, of murdering his sister Laura. His words shattered whatever normalcy we'd pieced together. The inquest was over, the coroner had ruled it an accidental death, with no uncertainty. Yet Luke claimed it was obvious to him that I was guilty and that no one else could see what he saw. He spun a bizarre story, that I had gone through his phone, seen messages between him and Laura, which, to be clear, I never did, gone over to their family home to confront her, and pushed her down the stairs when things got out of hand. He raged about going to the police and overturning the inquest, shouting that I wouldn't get away with it. It was like watching a stranger use Luke's mouth, someone I'd trusted for half my life now hurling these poisonous words at me. And, for the record, Laura and I had a great relationship. There was never tension, never an argument, no reason for any of this. I have no idea what messages he's referring to, and I can't imagine anything that could possibly twist its way from a text conversation into an accusation of murder. Since then, Luke has been living with his parents and will not speak to me at all. His mother has answered a few of my calls, but her responses are stilted and distant, even evasive. The last time we spoke, she even admitted she had no idea what messages Luke was talking about either. I am still reeling. I made vows to stand by him through everything, and I know grief can warp people in unthinkable ways. But when he turned on me like that, calling me a murderer, something inside me broke irrevocably, and I'm not sure there's any way back from this. The humiliation, the fear, and the heartbreak have left me doubting everything, including myself. I don't know what Luke might have told other friends and relatives about me, and the thought that my name could be stained by this wild accusation terrifies me. I even wondered if my husband had some undiscovered brain tumor, or suffered a psychotic break. Other than those early, obsessive questions, he'd seemed just like anyone else weathering a storm of grief. But now? I feel completely detached from reality, turning over every detail and sign of the past 6 months, as if I'd missed the moment everything shifted. After Laura's death, I was interviewed by the coroner's office because I was the last to see her alive. The facts couldn't be clearer. She died about 3 hours after my visit, and by then I was at the supermarket and later home, everything easily verified and on the record. But the idea that Luke may have harbored this suspicion, maybe even since the day of Laura's death, makes me question every memory and every interaction. Has he been building a case against me in his mind this whole time? Was he waiting, quietly and methodically, to let it explode in the most public and devastating way possible? Now, I'm in a bizarre, terrifying tangle. For my own safety, I feel I have no choice but to break the law, and I have already done so. I'm in England, and I'm desperate for legal guidance. I know what I've done is illegal, but when you fear for your own safety and sanity, what options really exist? My husband's old iPad, one he had forgotten about, still had his iCloud credentials saved. Out of fear and desperation, I downloaded his iCloud backup last night and read every message between him and Laura. There is absolutely nothing like the messages he described, no secret, no conflict, no reason at all to believe he's telling the truth. Now, as I wait for a locksmith to call me back so I can change the locks on the house we own together, also, technically against the law, I'm torn between guilt, fear, and raw survival instinct. My questions now are urgent, legal, and terrifyingly real. Do the authorities consider pragmatism for someone in my predicament, or have I just made everything worse for myself by acting for my own protection? My relationship is clearly over. The trust and love died when he called me a murderer, but his parents are shutting me out, refusing to see how serious and dangerous this all is. All I have to protect myself is that I'm being accused of murder. Is there any way to have him detained or get this situation treated like the mental health crisis I believe it truly is? Do I need a criminal solicitor, a family solicitor, or something else? My understanding is that a coroner's verdict can't be appealed, but can his accusations go anywhere? What should I do now, and what options do I have to keep myself safe from a man I used to love, someone who, in unimaginable grief and delusion, believes I'm capable of something as monstrous as killing his sister? It looks like your message is incomplete and I don't have the full story you're asking me to rewrite. Could you please paste the entire story or update you want me to work on? Once you provide the full text, I'll rewrite it according to your instructions. Update 1. There were no crazy, or even remotely suspicious messages. I searched through over 100 different terms, scrolling back years in their conversations. What I found took me by surprise, not because it revealed anything sinister, but simply because it was a side of them both I hadn't expected to see. And yet, there was nothing at all that could explain why I was being accused of murdering Laura based on their chats. There was absolutely no evidence of cheating. There was, I want to repeat, no incest. Not a single odd gap where someone might have deleted a conversation, or where they might have switched to another app. It was just two siblings making plans, swapping memes, gossiping. Yes, they said some unexpectedly awful things about a few people, though, to my relief, never about me. In a strange way, it was a relief. But at the same time, it left me with far more questions than answers. After finding nothing, I turned to legal advice and spoke to some professionals. Their honest opinion left me two options: divorce, or just sit down and take it. I reached out to my community mental health team. They told me they'd contact me, but it was clear nobody saw it as urgent. Feeling desperate, I called his mom and told her if I didn't hear from him by the weekend, I'd be hiring a solicitor and requesting a mental health assessment as part of the divorce proceedings. That's when everything exploded. He made a wild, almost theatrical post to Facebook, a platform neither of us has used in years, and things spiraled out of control from there. It was Friday night when he decided to post a long, detailed accusation on Facebook, introducing wild new facts. In this letter to the world, he claimed he'd been planning to leave me for months, with Laura's support, and that I had discovered their messages and murdered her to cover it up. He went further, saying the coroner was reopening the case, the police were preparing to arrest me, and he needed everyone to know his truth before a trial could gag him. It was so well worded, it felt disturbingly plausible. He then messaged the link to people directly, helping it gain traction. After all, we've lived in this town our entire lives, and our circle of friends is huge because of it. People from as far back as my school days started reaching out, bewildered and asking what the hell was going on. Chaos ensued. I knew I had to act. The only thing I could think of was to post the export of his entire chat history with Laura to Facebook. Yes, the whole thing, when I finally regained access to my account. I included a post explaining my side, mentioned that I had changed his iCloud and Apple passwords, and told him publicly that if he wanted them back, all he had to do was comment on my post and update his own, admitting he'd lied. Eventually, he did just that. In the whirlwind that followed his post, panic overtook me, and changing his passwords was my way of preserving the evidence. He'd know I had accessed everything. When I eventually spoke to him the next morning, it was glaringly obvious to me he was not having a mental episode. He was simply pretending, using that as his excuse now that he'd been caught up in his own web of deception. As soon as I outed him, he called me, slurring his words, clearly drunk, begging and promising to explain everything if I would just take my post down. I hung up, telling him to call again the next day. He did, after countless missed calls and texts. This time he tried to negotiate, guilt-trip me about his mental health, pressing on until I could tell the wrong people had seen his conversation and he realized his game was up. There was something obviously fake about it all, the way he recited facts about mental disorders, the way he begged for mercy when it was clear he was getting nowhere, and finally, the way he blocked me as soon as he realized there was no way out. None of this lined up with someone genuinely in crisis who believed I had killed his own sister. To this day, the question that gnaws at me is why? Why did he do any of this? He will not get his passwords back until I have answers. The legal advice I received insisted what I'd done was technically not legal, but it's beneath a court to pursue, so I'm clinging to that, because at the time, it felt like I had no choice, and now, it seems to be the only leverage I have left. I am desperate. God, it's all I've got. So this is where I stand. The relationship I once believed was my fate, right from when I was a teenager, has unraveled into a petty, twisted, vindictive circus, staged in public on social media, still for reasons I don't understand. My hope for some brain tumor explanation is fading. Clearly, tomorrow morning will be the day I call a lawyer and start taking the real steps I should have taken already. I'm humiliated. I don't even know if there are people out there who might actually believe him. I have no idea why any of this happened. It's not the update I wanted to give. All I can say now is thank you to those who stuck by me. He didn't react at all at first. He'd already called me dozens of times, and we'd spoken on the phone 5 separate times about it. His focus was clear, he cared about nothing but getting me to delete the chat log. The one condition I set was simple, he had to comment on my Facebook post and edit his own, admitting that he was lying. Only then would I consider talking. He finally did it. After that, He seemed to go silent publicly, but kept begging and pleading with me behind the scenes. Update 2. For weeks, I'd been spiraling, trying to make sense of why my husband suddenly hurled the wildest accusation imaginable at me. He claimed I murdered his sister, Laura, who died in a tragic accident at home 6 months ago. Even now, the accusation feels as absurd as it did the first time it left his lips. After Laura died, we discovered a little over £3,000 in hidden debt. That struck me as odd because Laura was always pretty open about her finances, and, yes, she had a bit of a reputation for overspending. But it wasn't so outside her character that I thought much more about it. Life pushed forward, grief sat stagnant in the background, and Laura became a memory both cherished and painful. A passing comment jolted me to take another look at the money situation, and that's when a message from Laura to my husband caught my eye. She was asking about a payment. I'd assumed at first it was about a car issue that popped up a few weeks before her death. I remember Luke paying at the garage, and us chatting about it after Laura dropped him home. In the haze of grief and suspicion, I skimmed through the messages, expecting to find some bombshell proving my supposed guilt. Instead, that message about a payment hung there, the only thing that even felt remotely off, and I had no clue what it really meant. On a shot in the dark, desperate for answers, I confronted his mother. I told her I knew about the money and that, if Luke didn't reach out to me that same day, I'd make sure everybody else heard about it, too. The tactic worked. He called me immediately and summoned me to his parents' house, where he looked like an absolute wreck. The first thing out of his mouth? He wanted to know if I was satisfied now that his friends all hated him because of what happened. I fired back that I didn't give a damn about his reputation. I was there for answers. It started unraveling. My husband confided that he had secretly been helping Laura pay off some hidden debts because she was embarrassed and struggling to keep up the appearance of her lifestyle. That's what he told the coroner's office, and because her death was so clearly an accident, nobody thought to dig deeper. But in reality? He took out loans and store cards in Laura's name without her knowledge. She somehow discovered it a few weeks before her death. Apparently, some shady guy from his work, the same guy who'd arranged it all before for others, helped him set it up. Had Laura not discovered the fraud, he claims, it could have all been written off quietly. But she did find out. The work friend vanished, Luke was left in the lurch, and in the aftermath, he scrambled to pay off the debts. I believe that's the general shape of what happened, but it's shocking to me that he would make such a recklessly stupid decision. After Laura's accidental death, he claimed he genuinely suspected, for a brief, panicked moment, that she had told me about the fraud right before her death, that we'd argued, and I'd killed her. He couldn't explain why on earth I'd ever do something so nonsensical, but apparently, guilt twisted his mind until the story fit. I believed him, up to a point, right up until he started throwing therapy speak at me, trying to blame his mental state. I cut that off fast. A few months after Laura's death, Luke got a letter from a credit company, no police, just creditors, saying he was under investigation. Laura hadn't left much behind, her debts, fraud and all, didn't even reach £10,000, and most were written off. But something during that financial cleanup flagged my husband. How? I'm not sure. When the letters turned threatening, he panicked, convinced his part in the fraud would be uncovered and that the inquest would be reopened. He believed he'd be accused of fraud, perjury, and, thanks to a so-called motive, maybe even Laura's murder. From what he told me, the credit company only knew that the fraud originated from our address. His solution was to accuse me, that way, nobody could prove which of us did it. It would be nothing but a coin toss. That's what he was willing to sacrifice our entire marriage for, his skin, his freedom, regardless of what it would do to my life and my reputation in the community we've both been part of forever. When he'd panicked, any sense of loyalty or decency was gone, replaced by pure, blind self-preservation. So I asked him how his witness statement fit this twisted story, how he'd acknowledged knowing about the debts and paying them in his official statement. If he was truly trying to shield me, that didn't make sense. He froze up completely, a 1,000-yard stare, gone for what felt like a lifetime, before finally admitting he hadn't thought about that. Of course, I pressed him, if he hadn't considered it, why had he just told me earlier that it was a lie he felt he needed to cover? That's when he broke down, sobbing. His parents rushed in, ushering me out of the house while his mother cried and insisted she couldn't talk to me about any of this. I was in tears, too, begging to understand how he could do this to me, for something so unforgivably stupid, and trying to figure out how much his parents knew. His mother couldn't, or wouldn't, say anything else, only that she couldn't continue the conversation. Now, I am almost certain that he was trying to frame me, not for Laura's death but for the fraud. He was going to claim to everyone that he'd lied to the coroner's office just to shield me, spinning a story of quietly paying her debts on my behalf before convincing himself that maybe I'd killed Laura. If he could wrap the whole mess up that way, he'd have an ironclad alibi, and everything would point right at me. That's the only way it makes sense now. My world has been turned upside down, and I'm desperate to get to the truth, to protect myself, to piece together what really happened. There are still a million questions swirling. But one thing is certain, Laura didn't deserve any of this. Her life ended in a moment that shouldn't have ever become a mystery or a spectacle. She just slipped, in old slippers, carrying a cup of tea, and hit her head on the windowsill. There was no murderer, no dramatic twist, just a stupid, heartbreaking, inexplicable accident. And for me, Accepting that loss is hard enough, without being dragged through hell by the man I thought I could trust. Update 3. I thought the worst thing that could happen had already happened, that nothing could outdo watching my husband stand up in his parents' living room and call me a murderer, but I was wrong. The worst thing, it turns out, is a white envelope with Laura's name on it dropping through my letterbox 6 months after she died. It was a welcome pack. A new store card, glittering and obscene, with a pastel brochure explaining the benefits of membership and an opening balance of £250. The issue date on the letter was last month. The address was ours. The application had been completed by telephone. When I called the number on the back, pretending to be Miss L, surname, and desperate to find out what's gone wrong, the woman on the line, who was perfectly kind, because none of this is her fault, read out the phone number used for the application. It was our landline. The call time was 7:41 p.m., a Tuesday. I checked my call log. The timestamp matched a call to unknown. That was the moment the floor of my life shifted again. Laura was dead when this was done. Someone sat in my kitchen and used my phone to open a line of credit in a dead woman's name, then lied about me murdering her when his mess started catching up to him. I took the envelope straight to my solicitor. I hadn't even properly retained one yet. I was still in that dithering half state of printing things and making lists I couldn't finish. She didn't dither. She scanned the letter and the card, took photos of the envelope, told me to stop touching any of it, and rang the police herself, while I watched. When the officer called me back, his tone changed as soon as he realized we weren't talking about an old debit card and a grieving family anymore. We were talking about ongoing fraud using the identity of someone deceased, linked to a landline, at a property shared by a named suspect who had already broadcast false statements intended to obstruct the truth. I went in that afternoon. I sat in a little room with gray carpet and a glass panel that reflected my face back at me every time I looked up, and I gave a statement that felt like sawing a part of my life off and handing it over. On the way home, I stopped at his parents' house to hand his mother a copy of what I'd given the police and to tell them calmly that officers would likely be in touch. She opened the door before I'd even knocked properly and said, "We can't talk to you," but when I held up the envelope with Laura's name on it, something went wrong in her face. She stepped back as if the paper itself were sharp. His dad sat at the kitchen table with both hands around a mug he wasn't drinking from, and I put the letter next to him. The kettle hissed to a boil, then clicked off, then hissed again because someone hadn't quite let it die, and I said, as gently as I could, "Whoever did this used our landline." His dad looked at his wife, then at me, then at the envelope again, like the three of us were a triangle and he couldn't get the angle right to acknowledge all of us at once. He said, quietly, "We'll cooperate," and his voice cracked right through the middle of the last word. That night, at 1:13 a.m., Luke tried to get into the house. It was the scrape of the key that woke me, the old spare we'd kept in the greenhouse, the one I'd forgotten about because grief makes your brain hold only useless details like the number of slats in the blinds. I'd changed the locks that first awful week, but we still have the stupid little backlatch on the conservatory that sticks if you don't lift the handle just so, and he knew that. I saw his shadow through the glass, a smear of movement against the neighbor's security light. He didn't knock. He didn't say my name. He pushed and pushed at the handle, then crouched to try the cat flap, which made a hollow clack like a toy trying to be something dangerous. I called 999 shaking so hard I couldn't get my postcode out the first time. The patrol car rolled up with that calm, practiced slowness they use at night when there are already too many heartbeats going wrong. He was still in the garden when they came through the side gate. He told them, loudly enough for my neighbors to hear, because why not make sure the spectacle has an audience, that he just wanted his iPad back. He said I had stolen evidence and hacked him, and he gestured at the house like I was inside there sawing jewels out of the floorboards to run to France with. The officer asked him if he had anything in writing giving him permission to be at the property at 1 a.m. He didn't. The officer asked him if he was aware that I'd applied for a non-molestation order that afternoon. He wasn't, not until he was, when the second officer handed him the papers they'd just finished serving on the street, the ink so new it smudged. He tried to laugh it off. He does this awful half chuckle when he doesn't have an answer yet, but when the officer told him that any further attempt to contact me, come to the house, approach my workplace, phone me, text me, or have anyone else do it on his behalf would be a breach, the chuckle died in his throat. He kept saying, "I just want to talk," and the officer kept saying, "You can talk through your solicitor." The following morning, the police asked me to bring in the iPad and the export of his messages, along with my screenshots of the Facebook posts and his public retraction. My solicitor met me at the station, and we went through it all again. They took the iPad, they took copies of everything, they asked for the landline call logs for that Tuesday night. On the way out, the officer who had taken my statement said, almost apologetically, "We might need to speak to the coroner's office as a matter of course, because of what he's put in writing about the death." I told him that was fine. A couple of hours later, my phone rang again. It was the coroner's officer, whose voice I remembered from the worst week of my life. She was brisk and kind and told me straight, the inquest was closed, it had not been reopened, and there was no cause to consider it unless new medical evidence emerged, which it had not. She also asked me to pass along, through the police if I preferred, any further instances of Luke publicly or privately alleging homicide. I can't describe the relief of someone official telling me a sane sentence. My solicitor submitted an urgent application for an occupation order after the attempted break-in. By the afternoon, there was an interim order, and a relayed message from his solicitor arrived at 5:42 p.m., saying he would comply with the terms, that he had no desire to inflame matters, and that any suggestion he had approached my property was a misunderstanding. In the same 5 minutes, he used a different number to call me 6 times in a row and left a voicemail that began, "You win." I forwarded it to my solicitor without listening to the rest. It's a weird thing, losing the instinct to press play. A day later, a man I didn't know messaged me, and that, too, felt like falling through a trapdoor I didn't realize had been under my feet all along. He gave a first name and told me he worked with Luke. He said he knew about the cards. He asked to meet somewhere public. I chose the Costa by the retail park because it always feels like there are too many people to be alone and too few people to be noticed. He turned up late, wearing a jumper that looked too big for him and a gilt that looked too tight. He said he'd been the one to put Luke onto the idea of tidying Laura's old accounts because he'd done similar for someone else and it's easy if you know what to say to the call center. He showed me a pay-as-you-go phone with messages between him and my husband that made my skin crawl. Luke had typed lines I recognized, not because of the words but because of the rhythm, the same clipped urgency he uses when he's set on a plan. "Can you do dead ones?" was one of them. Another, "If they ask, it's my wife. She was close to her. She'll vouch if anything." There was a third, sent the night of the Facebook post, that read, "It's done. She's the only one who believes me anymore." The man across from me stirred his coffee and said, "I'm not getting dragged down for this. He said you were going to prison." That's when I got scared. I slid my phone across the table and asked if he'd mind sending those screenshots to the detective. He did it without a flinch. Later that week, his mother texted me, just one line, formal and strange, asking if I might come to the house to collect some of my things she'd found at theirs. I went because I am still, stupidly, pitifully soft for these people, and because I wanted to put eyes on them and say the unnerving words we all needed to hear. She had a cardboard box ready with a scarf I'd left years ago and a couple of candles and a book Laura had lent me that I'd forgotten to return. Under the book, there was a spiral-bound notebook with a plastic cover and a faint coffee ring on the first page. "That's Laura's," she said, as if I might not know it from the cartoonish L she always doodled on her paper. I started to hand it back, and she shook her head. "I think you should have it." There were recipes in it, and a list of Christmas presents she'd half written the November before she died, and then, tucked in about midway through, a single yellow sticky note with my name on it. Just my name and a date. I turned the page and there was a half-drafted email, written out in her handwriting as if she were practicing saying it out loud. I need to tell you something about Luke. Please don't be angry with me, I didn't know until," and then it stopped. The date on the sticky note was 2 weeks before she died. I sat at their table and cried as quietly as I could manage. His mother stood by the sink and looked out of the window like the garden might give her a different ending to this story if she stared hard enough. I didn't ask her what she knew, not because I didn't want to, but because she was holding a corner of the counter like it might pitch her into the air if she let go. The police called 2 days later to say they'd arrested Luke on suspicion of fraud and attempted fraud by false representation, and on suspicion of committing an act/series of acts with intent to pervert the course of justice. They cautioned him and interviewed him with a solicitor present. He answered no comment to most of it, which I know because the detective told me plainly when I asked, "Is he still pretending I killed his sister?" That he had taken advice. They returned his phone after imaging it. They kept mine long enough to make me realize how much worse waiting is when you have nothing practical to do with your hands. There has been a strange, mean little coda to the social media mess. He edited his post again to say he only admitted to lying because I threatened him with hacked material, and then he set his account to private. A friend from school sent me a screenshot, and for the first time since all this began, I didn't feel the need to chase every lie down the hillside and club it into silence. It's new, this ability to watch something break badly for me and not sprint after it with tape and a plea. Maybe that's what happens when your husband tries to weaponize your grief, your credibility, and your postcode. You learn to let the wind take the scrap he's waving and trust that the truth you've put into the hands of people with badges and file numbers weighs more than a Facebook paragraph ever will. I have an interim occupation order and a non-molestation order in place, a meeting next week to talk about the divorce petition, and a CIFA's protective registration with my name on it so nobody can yank my life around on the back of a phone call again. I have the notebook with the coffee ring, and the sticky note, and a solicitor who looks at me like she's already 5 steps further down the corridor than I am and is willing to wait while I catch up. His parents have gone very quiet. I think they are grieving their daughter for a second time, in a different shape. None of this has given me back the person I married or the friend I lost or the easy afternoons where Laura would come round and put her bare feet on my sofa and mock my playlists. But it has given me something I didn't expect to feel again, that steady, boring trust in the world where if you put a thing in the right tray, evidence, facts, a card with the wrong name on it, someone sensible will look at it and do the next correct thing. For the first time since he said the word murder with my name attached to it, I slept through the alarm. The cat woke me by yelling at a bird on the windowsill, and when I stood up, the house felt like mine. Not because I'd won anything, but because I'd stopped being willing to lose everything. Update 4. It turns out there is a specific sound your heart makes when a detective says the word charge down a phone and you're stood in your kitchen in socks, holding a spoon you can't remember picking up. It's not a thud. It's a kind of vanishing. 1 second there's a person called you, worrying about whether the washing will dry on the rack. The next, there's a clear, narrow track in front of you with tape on either side and strangers in plain clothes waiting at the end of it with clipboards. They executed warrants at 3 addresses: our house, his parents', and his work locker. I didn't know about the locker because I didn't know he'd been suspended, and then dismissed. The detective said it offhand, like a weather report, and I had to put the spoon down because my hand wouldn't remember not to shake otherwise. At his parents' they found a blue plastic box with a cracked lid that once had Christmas lights in it. Inside were hard copies of things I didn't know anybody printed anymore. My supermarket receipt from the day Laura died with my total circled in red. A screenshot of my Find My iPhone location dot on a map with a timestamp scribbled next to it. Notes headed timeline where he'd written M arrives 9:17. Crosscheck and then underlined stare angle 3 times, as if he thought he could bully physics into siding with him. There were drafts of the Facebook post in a spiral pad with smudges where he'd practiced different versions of the same lie. It is not illegal to be deranged on paper, but when you put it next to a letter with Laura's name on it, a landline bill with a call at 7:41 p.m., and a pay-as-you-go phone with "Can you do dead ones?" sitting there in a gray bubble like something unholy trying to pretend to be casual, it becomes less paper and more a blueprint for a trap. They charged him with fraud and attempted fraud by false representation, and with doing acts intended to pervert the course of justice. He refused a duty solicitor at first, then didn't. He answered no comment like it could save his lungs. He was bailed with conditions. The charge sheet is a nasty little thing, precise and cold, with dates and amounts and the word thereby doing a lot of heavy lifting. He was put before the magistrates on a damp Tuesday when the court corridor smelled like the inside of an old filing cabinet and the vending machine only had Twix left. I went, not to watch him suffer, but because there is an ugly comfort in hearing the formal names of the things that ate your life spoken out loud by someone in a robe. He was in a suit I'd never seen before that didn't fit over his shoulders properly, hair too clean, jaw bristled with the kind of shave you do when your hands are shaking. He stood behind the glass and gave his date of birth and his address, his parents, and when they asked for his occupation there was this fractional, hanging silence that felt like another room opening under the one we were in. Unemployed, he said, and whatever soft, last stupid strand of pity I'd been hoarding for him snapped like cotton pulled too hard. They sent him up to Crown. The bail remained. He glanced at me once and it was like watching a stranger try on his face. He did that half chuckle when they repeated the non-contact conditions, and the usher told him she wasn't asking a question. I went home and changed the bed. There's a horrible little aftertaste to all of this. The morning after court, HR called me in. Someone had emailed my work from a throwaway account attaching his original Facebook post and a subject line that read, simply, safeguarding. It was phrased like concern, which makes my hands hot to think about. I took in the orders and the police reference. HR were exactly as brisk and kind as you want them to be, and I sat there looking at a biro with our logo on it and thought, not for the first time, that if evil had to be bright red and smelt of sulfur, none of us would ever get caught out by it. I forwarded the email to the detective. It's an offense to harass by proxy. It went in the file. His work friend, the one with the pay-as-you-go phone, gave a formal statement. He'd kept more than texts. There were voice notes. I listened to one, with my solicitor next to me, because the detective asked if it was his voice and because there are certain small violences you must commit if you want the bigger one to stop. It was Luke, in that clipped mode he gets when he's convinced everyone is too slow for him. If it's between us they can't prove anything. She was there that morning. Why do you think I've been, anyway? We just need to tip it, yeah? We tip it. I didn't realize I was biting my lip until I tasted blood. The detective paused it herself. She said, "That's enough," which I think she meant for both of us. 2 days later, the coroner's office called me not because anything had changed, nothing has, nothing will, but because they'd received an anonymous email attaching manipulated screenshots that purported to show a WhatsApp argument between me and Laura the morning she died. The file names were a gift, final_final2. PNG, usethazone. PNG. The metadata was even more generous. Somebody had saved them from a photo editor late at night, days after Laura's funeral. The email had been sent from a Gmail account created the hour before on his parents' broadband. The officer said, "The way you tell a child that rain is wet but their shoes won't melt, we are not reopening the inquest." I said, "Thank you," and then sat at my dining table staring at the wood grain until the cat sat on my wrist and insisted on existing again. His parents have stopped pretending they don't live in the world. His father rang me and asked, in a voice so gentle it felt like being lowered instead of dropped, if I'd be there when they cleared Laura's room, or if I'd like them to do it alone and call me afterwards. I went. We took her clothes out of her wardrobe and folded them badly and put them in charity shop bags and then took them out of the bags and folded them properly and put them back again because grief makes you do things twice in case one of the tries mattered more. On her bedside table was the mug with the hairline crack she always said had character. Inside it were her keys and a badge from a museum she went to with me in 2018, and under the mug there was a printout of an email she'd drafted to herself, the same handwriting as the notebook, but typed, like she was learning the shape of the words before saying them. I need to tell you something. She never sent it. It is a very specific kind of mercy when the worst thing in a room is the thing you already know about. Later that week, his mother knocked at my door holding a carrier bag with his old hoodie in it and a set of keys on a ring that had a tiny plastic dinosaur. "We found these," she said, not looking at me. "You should change the back door too." When she lifted her eyes, they were the eyes of someone who has finished rearranging the furniture around a hole. "We will tell the truth," she said, and it wasn't theatrical. It was quiet. I nodded. There's no way back from any of this, but there are ways forward. My solicitor made the non-molestation order final. The occupation order was extended. The divorce application went in online with the kind of surreal ease that makes you feel you've bought a train ticket by mistake. He acknowledged service within hours. No fault feels like writing your name on a chalkboard and walking away. The police came for my landline logs. The lady at the provider spoke to me like she was handing me a baby, not a PDF, and when the detective cross-checked the 7:41 p.m. call with one made to the same retailer from his parents' number the next day, there it was, a pair of ugly little footprints, one in my kitchen and one in theirs, stepping over a person who no longer exists as if she was a paving stone. They also tied a Crime Stoppers tip from months ago, the one that mentioned motive and secret messages, to the Wi-Fi at his office. There's CCTV from the corridor outside the break room showing him walking in with a sandwich and walking out 10 minutes later without the sandwich, which feels allegorical in a way that would be funny if anything about this was. There was a small, mean coda again because this story keeps loving those. Someone tried to collect a click and collect laptop in Laura's name at a shop 2 towns over, giving my address and a version of her date of birth that was 1 digit out. They didn't have ID, they left when the manager said he was going to call it in. The CCTV is clear enough to see the shape of a jaw I don't recognize. He's not doing it himself anymore, the detective said. That's a decision he's made. I went home and put all the posts straight into a shoebox marked with a date. It's astonishing how much calmer you feel when every piece of paper knows exactly where it lives. We had the supervised collection at the house. He was allowed 20 minutes, 2 officers present, only to take items listed in advance. He arrived with a holdall and that too clean hair again. He didn't look at me. He took his toolbox and a stack of old PC game cases and the hideous lamp his aunt gave us that I always pretended to like. He tried, once, to say my name, and the constable put up a hand with such gentle finality it felt like prayer. Later, when I moved the sofa to Hoover, I found a folded note that had slid underneath. For a second, the dumbest second, I thought it might be an apology or an explanation that would make everything behave. It was a photocopy of the first page of his Facebook post with a line at the bottom in his writing, "You don't get to win." I put it in the shoebox with the rest of the post and labeled the spine with a date. You can't argue with someone who has opted out of the rules of reality, but you can file them. I slept again, properly, the night after court. The alarm went at 7 and it took me a moment to realize that the sound I could hear wasn't the kettle or the cat or the bin lorry, but my own house being a house in the unremarkable, generous way houses do when they aren't occupied by impendingness. I am tired in a way that feels earned. The Crown Court date is months away. There will be statements and conferences and a prep meeting nobody wants to go to where someone will ask me if I have anything to add and I will say no because I put the thing in the right tray and watched a sensible person pick it up. His parents sent me a text last night, "We're making lasagna if you want to come by after work." I didn't, not because I don't love them, but because I made myself beans on toast and watched the little blackbird who bullies all the other birds shout at his own reflection in my window until he realized it's just him. There isn't a ribbon on this. There's a lot of paper with my name on it and a quieter kitchen and a notebook with a coffee ring and Laura's L on the front and the knowledge that the worst thing that happened to her wasn't a story at all, just a fall and a hit and an absence. Nobody knows how to fix. But there is a path, and there are people whose jobs are to walk a path with you, and I am finally walking it without waiting for a door to fly open behind me and someone to shout murder at my back. The cat has adopted the blue plastic evidence box as a throne because of course she has. The house smells faintly of bleach and tomato sauce. I can see my breath on the conservatory glass in the mornings and write my own name in it and watch it disappear on purpose.